Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, July 16th, 2024. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Zelensky says that Russia should attend the Ukraine summit. So Zelensky said on Monday that Russian representatives should attend the next international summit on the Ukraine war. And these comments marked a shift from Zelensky since he has previously refused to invite Russia to attend these summits that he's kind of organized. They call them peace summits, but the big issue is that one party of the war hasn't been invited to attend, so it's not really a peace summit. And he's used these summits to push what he calls his peace formula. Switzerland hosted one of these summits last month, and that included representatives from 92 countries, but again, Russia was not invited. So Zelensky told reporters that he's in the process of planning the next summit. And he said, quote, "I set a goal that in November we would have a fully ready plan. I think that representatives of Russia should be at the second summit," end quote. So hopefully this is a sign that he's actually considering some sort of negotiations with Russia. Again, this could be, mean a major shift, or could have been something he just said. I'm hoping that this means that there is a shift here. And these comments come as Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has been pushing for a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Orban discussed his ideas in recent visits to Kiev, Moscow, and Beijing. For his efforts, the top EU officials are boycotting meetings that are going to be held in Hungary, EU meetings. They're not happy that he's going around talking about peace in Ukraine. They don't want that. And Hungary is currently holding the EU's rotating presidency. So this is something Orban did pretty much as soon as Hungary took that presidency. He started really pushing for a peace deal. So Zelensky's peace formula, as he calls it, it calls for a complete Russian withdrawal from Ukraine. It calls for Russia to give up Crimea, which it has had since 2014. And it also, I believe, calls for war crimes tribunals. And all of this before peace talks could even happen between Russia and Ukraine. And so the thing that Orban suggested to Zelensky was, hey, how about you think about a ceasefire with Russia first? And then, we can get into the conditions and everything. Zelensky said he rejected the idea, but maybe this could be a sign. Him saying that Russia should attend the summit could be a sign that he's softening his stance. We'll see how Russia responds to this. Putin also recently rejected the idea of a ceasefire with Ukraine, saying they couldn't be trusted. Zelensky said Russia couldn't be trusted, so they kind of said similar things. But Russia has been open to peace talks throughout the war. This would certainly be a one-sided summit, with most countries in attendance supporting the war against Russia. But we'll see. Again, hopefully this means, maybe not this summit, but just in the near future that some sort of negotiations might begin, or at least be considered seriously. Throughout the war, the only time that a real peace deal was on the table was back in March and April of 2022. But the U.S. and NATO discouraged Ukraine from signing a deal and promised to support Ukraine's fight against Russia. Again, I always say this, but that should be one of the biggest scandals of the Biden administration, the fact that there was a chance at peace in Ukraine, and they decided, you know what, we're going to give you $40 billion. That was after they scuttled that agreement was when the U.S. passed that big $40 billion aid package for Ukraine. All right, so the next one here, Poland considering shooting down Russian missiles over Ukraine, but wants NATO support. So Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski said Friday that Poland was exploring the idea of shooting down Russian missiles over Ukraine if they're deemed a threat to Polish territory. So Poland recently signed a bilateral security deal with Ukraine, and Zelensky said that it included a mechanism for Poland to intercept Russian missiles, but Sikorski said that it was still just an idea. And I think it was pretty clear when Zelensky made those comments that it was essentially Poland agreeing to discussing the idea. So it doesn't mean that they're going to start shooting Russian missiles out of the sky. Sikorski said at a speech at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., quote, "At this stage, this is an idea. What our agreement said is we will explore this idea," end quote. So Sikorski said that Poland would have the right to intercept Russian missiles if they were entering Polish territory or Polish airspace by mistake, but said that there was a dilemma that the debris could cause damage if shot down over Poland. He said, quote, "The Ukrainians are saying, please, we will not mind. Do it over our airspace when they're in imminent danger of crossing into Polish territory. To my mind, that's self-defense, but we are exploring the idea," end quote. And it's clear what Ukraine wants. They want, Poland to take this step out, start shooting down Russian missiles that get a little too close to their territory, and then they're going to say, well, why don't you, look, our cities are getting destroyed. Why don't you, keep moving a little further east with your interceptions. And Russian missiles have briefly entered Polish airspace during Russian bombardments of Ukraine, but they've gone back into Ukraine. So I think Sikorski was kind of saying, if we shot them down when they entered our territory, we would have debris, and they're probably just going to go back out or whatever. And then when we're always talking about this, we have to mention back in November 2022, a Ukrainian air defense missile landed in Poland and killed 2 civilians. And the Ukrainians at the time claimed that it was a Russian missile, which seemed like an attempt to get direct NATO intervention. So a few days before Sikorski's comments, Poland's defense minister said that Poland would only shoot down Russian missiles over Ukraine if NATO agreed on it. They wouldn't just do it. Poland wouldn't do it on its own. And then Stoltenberg commented on this on the sidelines of the NATO summit when he was asked about the possibility of Poland shooting down Russian missiles. He said, quote, "NATO's policy is unchanged. We will not be involved in this conflict. We will not become part of the conflict. So we support Ukraine in the destruction of Russian aircraft, but NATO will not be directly involved," end quote. So Stoltenberg ruling out the idea, unfortunately, does not mean it won't happen in the future. We have seen throughout the war NATO taking multiple steps that it previously ruled out, including giving Ukraine tanks, fighter jets, and letting them use NATO missiles to strike Russian territory. That's another huge recent escalation. But for now, it doesn't seem like we're going to start seeing NATO shooting Russian missiles out of the sky. All right, so the next one here, Gallant says the Israeli security establishment wants a deal. So Israeli media reported on Monday that Defense Minister Yoav Gallant met with relatives of Israeli hostages held in Gaza and told them that a deal with Hamas was possible and that it was supported by the Israeli security establishment. He reportedly said in this meeting, according to Israel's Channel 12, quote, "When a deal was not possible, I told you. Now it is possible, so I'm telling you it is closer than it has ever been. There is complete unanimity in the defense establishment, the IDF, the Shin Bet, and the Mossad that there is no insurmountable security obstacle to the deal from their point of view," end quote. So saying it's unanimous, that they would have no problem with this deal with Hamas that's been on the table. And there's been other recent reports saying that Israeli generals, Israel's top military brass wants a ceasefire in Gaza, and they see it as the best way to secure the remaining hostages. But Netanyahu and members of his coalition government who have significant sway over him do not want a deal. According to the Channel 12 report, Gallant continued, quote, "The matter is not parked with us. It is critical to move ahead with decisions in the near future. It's important to finalize the processes in the coming days before the Prime Minister's trip to Washington or in the course of his visit. After that, it will be much more difficult and complicated," end quote. So I think he's saying if he goes to D.C. and has a successful visit, clinches some more U.S. support, then it's going to be even harder to get him to agree to a ceasefire deal. The hostage families reportedly asked for Gallant's advice, and he said for them to try to schedule a meeting with Netanyahu before he leaves for Washington to address Congress later this month. That's scheduled for July 24th. He said, quote, "You should arrange a meeting with the prime minister before he flies to the U.S. He's the one who decides," end quote. So according to the reports, what I've pieced together, and I mean, some have said this explicitly, that Hamas made some concessions, and this is going back about a week and a half or a week and a couple days. They basically conceded to go back to the original language that was vague, that wouldn't actually commit Israel to a permanent ceasefire, that would allow Israel to enter the first phase of the deal, initial hostage and prisoner exchange, more aid entering Gaza, 6-week ceasefire, and then they think that they would be able to restart military operations either after that first 6 weeks or later on. And that's, I think the Israeli military wants a break right now. They want to prepare their troops for potential war in Lebanon. And they're having a tough time. They have to keep re-entering these areas in Gaza that they've destroyed. But it's Netanyahu and his coalition that are preventing a deal from happening. And all right, so the next one here, UNRWA headquarters in Israel flattened by the Israeli military. So the head of the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, said Monday that the organization's headquarters in Gaza City have been flattened as Israel has escalated attacks across the Strip. So this is the head of UNRWA. He said, quote, "Shocking, UNRWA headquarters in Gaza turned into a battlefield and now flattened. Another episode in the blatant disregard of international humanitarian law," end quote. So the Israeli military has waged war against UNRWA in Gaza over these past 9 months, killing nearly 200 of the aid agency's employees. Israel also accused 12 UNRWA employees of participating in the October 7th attacks on southern Israel, but has not produced evidence for the claim. You see the pictures here of this building that's been destroyed. The U.S. and other Western countries, you know, the point I always make with this is you had Israel make these claims about UNRWA, and the U.S. immediately said, oh, okay, whatever you say, we're going to cut off UNRWA. And UNRWA is an aid organization. So we're going to cut aid to the Palestinians because Israel made this claim without any evidence. But there's clear evidence of Israeli war crimes, of them intentionally blocking aid, starving Palestinians, starving children to death, leaving newborn babies to die in hospitals, all these just horrific, horrific things happening in Gaza. They haven't cut off the IDF. You know, they still are giving them whatever they want, and they're actually getting more. They're getting another $17 billion out of that big bill that Biden signed a couple months ago. All right, so the next one here, Israel strikes 5 schools in week of massacres. So this is from Al Jazeera. Israeli forces have attacked 5 separate schools in Gaza in just 8 days, killing dozens of people sheltering in them, according to Palestinian officials, medics, and rescuers. The latest attack on Sunday struck the United Nations-run Abu Oraban school in the Nusret refugee camp, killing at least 17 people and injuring about 80. Most of the victims were women and children, said Palestinian Civil Defense. So just more, these have all these schools, you know, kids aren't going to school in Gaza. They haven't for 9 months, and they've turned into shelters for civilians, and Israel has been bombing quite a bit of them lately. They've really escalated the airstrikes on Gaza in the past week. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu to meet Biden at the White House. So Netanyahu will meet with Biden at the White House on July 22nd, which is 2 days before he delivers an address to a joint session of Congress. This was reported by the Times of Israel. I'm not sure if it's been officially confirmed by the White House yet. And this will mark the first time that Biden hosts Netanyahu in Washington since the Israeli leader took power in December 2022. They had 2 in-person meetings during that time, one during the UN General Assembly in New York in September 2023, and when President Biden visited Israel in October 2023, but he hasn't hosted him at the White House. Biden and Netanyahu have held frequent phone calls since October 7th. The media has portrayed it as a very testy relationship. Biden's so angry at Netanyahu, yet he continues to fund and support his genocidal war in just about every possible way that he can. And what does he get for invading Rafah, dropping 2,000-pound bombs on a safe zone refugee camp? He gets a meeting at the White House, and he gets to address Congress. And this support continues, I mentioned, as Netanyahu is clearly sabotaging the chances of a ceasefire deal. All right, so the next one here, Palestinians raped and tortured in Israeli detention, according to one of the Palestinian prisoner groups. So this article is from Middle East Eye. New incidents of abuse suffered by Gaza detainees at the hands of Israeli forces have come to light following a news conference held on Monday by the Commission of Detainees Affairs, a Palestinian prisoners organization. Speakers at the press conference in Ramallah and the occupied West Bank provided updates on the conditions faced by Palestinians taken from Gaza and held in Israeli custody. Khalil Majneh, the commission's lawyer, reported on his conversation with Mohammed Arab, Al Arabi's TV's Gaza correspondent, who was detained by Israeli forces during their raid on Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital on March 18th. He said, quote, Mohammed Arab, the journalist with Al Arabi TV, informed me of cases of rape of inmates as well as torture in front of everyone, end quote. He spoke to Arab in Israel's Ofer prison in the West Bank, where he was recently transferred along with some prisoners from the notorious Taiwan detention center in Israel's Negev desert. And that is the one where there's been Israeli whistleblowers who have come out and blown the whistle on torture, on the treatment. Basically, they're all penned up, blindfolded all day. They're tortured in different ways. And there's been all sorts of allegations from Palestinians about, just horrific things. Today, Taiwan came under scrutiny after investigations and reports exposed severe torture inflicted on prisoners abducted from Gaza. And Israel previously said that they were going to phase out the use of this prison, but this lawyer is saying that detainees from Gaza continue to be brought to that detention center. So they're still using it. All right, so the next one here, the UN says it will take 15 years to clear rubble from Gaza. Another one from Middle East Eye. So clearing the rubble left from Israel's sweeping bombardment of the Gaza Strip is expected to take 15 years and cost between $500 million and $600 million, the UN said on Monday. So this is UNRWA. They said, quote, debris poses a deadly threat for people in the Gaza Strip, as it can contain unexploded ordnance and harmful substances, end quote. That's another thing, the unexploded bombs. Israel dropped at least 70,000 tons of bombs on Gaza between October 7th and May 4th, surpassing the World War II bombings in Dresden, Hamburg, and London combined, according to the Euromed Human Rights Monitor. So just shows how heavily bombed Gaza has been. All right, so the next one here, Israeli drone kills a prominent Syrian businessman. So an Israeli drone strike, this article is from Jason Ditz. An Israeli drone strike was carried out on the Damascus-Beirut highway on Monday, hitting an SUV and killing prominent Syrian businessman Mohammed Bara Khashoggi. It is unconfirmed for now, but Israeli media reported a Hezbollah commander was also slain in the strike. So the Hezbollah commander being killed is what's unconfirmed. The businessman appears to have been confirmed. So Israel did not comment on the attack nor indicate why Khashoggi would be targeted for killing. He was sanctioned by the U.S. for his and his family's involvement in the Syrian oil industry. So the U.S. sanctions them, and then Israel kills them. This has happened with someone in Lebanon, too, that was recently killed in an Israeli drone strike, I think a Syrian. And then, you have the Israeli media accusing him of funding Hezbollah and all that stuff. So more strikes, Israeli attacks on Syria. And then the next one here, Israeli strike in southern Lebanon kills 3 civilians. This is another one from Jason. Israeli warplanes attacked the town of Bint Jebel in southern Lebanon on Monday, killing at least 3 civilians and wounding 3 others. Lebanese sources say the attack reportedly hit a home, killing 3 members of the same family. Israel claimed the attack struck a weapons storage facility and did not mention any civilian casualties. which is what they're usually claiming, that they hit Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon, but they've destroyed a lot of homes. And this comes, again, just tensions are high, and the strikes continue every day across the border. All right, so the next one here, the new GOP platform vows support for Israel. So the Republican Party posted its new platform last week that's expected to be ratified at the Republican National Convention, which started Monday. Started as scheduled despite the assassination attempt on Trump. So Israel is the only foreign country mentioned by name as one that the GOP vows to support. It says, quote, "We will stand with Israel and seek peace in the Middle East," end quote. And referring to NATO allies, the platform reads, quote, "Republicans will strengthen alliances by ensuring that our allies must meet their obligations to invest in our common defense and by restoring peace to Europe." So there's a report in Israel Hayom, which noted that this same standard of allies investing more money in their defense is not applied to Israel. And Israel Hayom is kind of, bragging about that. Israel receives, I just go into the figures from the military aid, which you all know, $3.8 billion each year, and they got another $17 billion in military aid from that big bill. And Republicans have made an effort to make themselves, the more pro-Israel party ahead of the November elections, and have strongly criticized President Biden despite all the support he's provided to Israel. Trump has accused Biden of abandoning Israel and has signaled that he will provide strong support for the campaign in Gaza. So the GOP platform also targets pro-Palestinian protesters at college campuses, listing as one of its promises in all caps, quote, "Deport pro-Hamas radicals and make our college campuses safe and patriotic again," end quote. So it's similar to this bill that was introduced by Representative Andy Ogles, Republican from Tennessee. He introduced a bill to deport college protesters to Gaza. So the platform also commits to taking a hard line on China, another foreign policy related thing. It says, quote, "Republicans will revoke China's most favored nation status, phase out imports of essential goods, and stop China from buying American real estate and industries," end quote. So the next one here, what will J.D. Vance do for Trump's foreign policy? So this one's from Daniel Larison from Responsible Statecraft. Good analysis on J.D. Vance's foreign policy. So he was picked on Monday. That was the big news. And out of all the names Trump was throwing out, Trump wasn't throwing them out, but were being reported as potential picks. J.D. Vance, when it comes to foreign policy, Ukraine especially, is probably the least bad that he could have picked. And he has been pretty outspoken about Ukraine. And there's reports all over, the New York Times and everything, just like freaking out about him saying, "Oh, I could care less what happens to Ukraine." Apparently, he said that once. So I do think, and as Larison gets into here, a few interesting things. Vance is young; he's 39 years old. He's going to be the youngest vice presidential nominee since Richard Nixon in 1952. And he was just elected to the Senate. And Trump, so again, the big thing is the Ukraine policy. And Larison, Larison's very good at analyzing foreign policy and kind of following this stuff and having kind of a realistic view on Trump and everything. But he does say he thinks it's possible that if a Trump-Vance ticket wins, it is conceivable that the U.S. could begin reducing or cutting off aid to Ukraine next year, as soon as they get in. But then there's other things that Vance is very hawkish on, Israel being one of them, very supportive of Israel. He has attacked Biden for micromanaging Israel's war in Gaza, and he agrees with Trump that the Israeli government should finish the job. And when Trump says that, he means let's give them everything that they want to finish the job, which finishing the job, does that mean ethnic cleansing and genocide and, finishing it? And he is also a China hawk. I'm not super familiar with what he said about China, but I have seen him say, and you see this from a lot of people, that, we have to kind of wind down support for Ukraine so we could build up more around China, support Taiwan. This kind of view was really encapsulated in a letter that Josh Hawley sent to Blinken a couple years ago. Basically said, you got to prioritize arming Taiwan over Ukraine. All the weapons that you're sending to Ukraine, you should be sending to Taiwan. I'll read what Larison writes about that. He says, Vance's hawkishness extends to East Asia as well. He has framed his opposition to aid for Ukraine primarily in terms of needing to focus U.S. resources on containing China, and he faults Biden for not doing enough on this front. So, and this is something that's heating, that's going on. It doesn't have much attention, but kind of the buildup around China is being carried out. And it's something that a Trump administration is going to continue, if not increase even more. At least that's what's expected. So good on Ukraine, but then you have, the other issues. So, Ukraine is something that really could, explode into something major at any minute. So the fact that there's a chance that could wind down, I think, is good. All right, so the last story here, Taiwan's lie moves to erase Chiang Kai-Shek's legacy. So this is kind of an interesting thing that's happening in Taiwan that I wanted to just go over a bit. This is from the South China Morning Post. And Taiwan holds its last Chiang Kai-Shek honor guard as William Lai leads move to erase his legacy. So Taiwan's hourly changing of the guard before a giant statue of former leader Chiang Kai-Shek has formally ended, seen as a part of its new government's effort to erase the legacy of the late Kuomintang chief and the island's historical ties to mainland China. So this ceremony that they've done, they ended. And so this is something, they're tearing down statues of Chiang Kai-Shek in public areas. Right now, the military has been resisting taking down the statues at bases and things, so that's not happening yet. But as far as I know, in public areas, they're removing statues of Chiang Kai-Shek, who was the leader of the Kuomintang during the Chinese Civil War. He was the leader of Taiwan from 49 to, I think, 76 was when he died, somewhere around there. And he was a dictator. He was a brutal dictator. That period is known as the White Terror, I believe. I might be getting these details wrong. I'm sorry. But I believe it was 76. I think it's in here. Chiang ruled Taiwan for nearly 3 decades until his death in 1975, after leading his nationalist or Kuomintang troops to the island in 1949. So, and he set up his government on the island, enforced a previously declared martial law, and ruled with an iron fist. The martial law was only lifted in 1987, more than a decade after his death. Despite accusations of persecuting thousands of opponents during the White Terror periods, so I was right, the White Terror period from the 1950s to the 1970s, Chiang is still remembered by many members of the military as the spiritual leader of Taiwan's armed forces, and there's a lot of statues of him. And so, there is kind of two things, maybe not two things happening here, but on the one hand, Chiang has a very brutal legacy. On the other hand, it is the island's connection to China, to the mainland. And, this is something that the DPP is trying to remove. Even though Taiwan is something like 90% Han Chinese, they want to, the DPP, the ruling party, wants, more of a Taiwanese identity. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Jeffrey Sachs, NATO Declaration and the Deadly Strategy of Neoconservatism. One from David Stockman, Living with Wilson's Folly Over 100 Years Later. One from Janet Abu Elias and Lillian Malden, The Perils of a U.S. Arms Stockpile on Taiwan. One from John White, NATO Summit, Not a Shield but a Bloodied Sword. One from Dominic Sansone, U.S. media complex is escalating the Ukraine war. So please go check all of that out. Support this show by telling your friends about antiwar.com. Share, like, subscribe, comment, follow us on X, Instagram, all that stuff. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.